The media's view alone becomes the established way of viewing this event. Other guesses not even tolerated. I'd studied Islam for 4 years before this event had happened, and I'd been called all kinds of names for daring to discuss or publicize the results of my research, be it verbally or in writing, via booklets. But now my studies had suddenly become the in thing to have some knowledge about. Islam, Jihad, Osama bin Laden had now become common household words in our everyday language, and people rushed to learn what they could about them. They wanted to be able to walk around and talk about them to show others how current and culturally aware they were of the newest fad. It was the day I never thought I would see. The subject for which I was an alone, by myself dork for even caring about had become hot. The world was backwards as all get out. In the weeks following the attack, I was gravely concerned about how our society corporately, in the general sense, was going to be conditioned to view this event. My main concern was not so much the corporate office worker who pretty much lived in a cubicle, nor was it the average Joe struggling to put food on the table through working in a factory, nor was it the teenager behind the cash register at your local retail store at the mall. They were simply going to be the followers of whatever the trend was going to be that was going to be created. I was concerned about what they'd ultimately believe because they, the common people, make up the majority of our nation's people, but they were not my immediate concern at that moment. My immediate concern at that moment was actually the people who occupied teaching positions in the universities and the public schools. These people were going to be the actual authors of whatever the trend was going to be, and these people were going to take their cues from the news media and from the government. The average working Joe was going to follow them, and they were going to follow the media in forming his or her opinion about the issue of Islam, Jihad, and terrorism. A sort of trickle-down method would ultimately allow either a right or a wrong understanding of Islam and Jihad to become the dominant way of seeing things that was going to be spread in our culture and throughout our land. I kept my eyes fiercely on the television, monitoring the news media and listening carefully to the speeches made by President George W. Bush and other government officials and opinion makers. And sadly, what I'd feared the most began to happen right before my eyes. The people's perception of Islam was being diluted with political correctness and clouded by the modern diversity movement that was hot in the 1990s and early 2000s. A peaceful version of Islam was being passed off as though it was accurate. I'd studied Islam for years before this had happened. I was a scholar in the field. And the picture of Islam that was being painted by the media was unrecognizable even to me. The common cries across America were such things as, "This wasn't real Islam," and "Islam is not to blame." I wish I had $1 for every time I'd heard a news story whose moral was actually, "Don't mess with Muslims about this incident." I even got called a bigot in the week following the attack for sharing the truth about Islam and Jihad from the Qur'an itself with a coworker, and this coworker had come to me with questions about it. Now, I could have just told them what they wanted to hear, but this would have been dishonest. This would have been fake. This is not how I do things. It speaks volumes about the condition of a society when lies tickle its people's ears and when the truth actually makes them angry. In all of the confusion following this event, America was totally backwards. I could not believe what it was all boiling down to. This book is nothing personal. I don't believe in attacking people or personalities. That's not what I'm about. And I certainly don't single out Arab Americans or our Somali brothers and sisters who've come over to call America their home and to chase their dreams. I don't want any particular group of people to feel singled out or feel like a targeted victim of this book. This book is not about people. This book is about a religion. The people exist apart from and independent of the religion. It's totally understandable and believable to suggest that a person could love people and at the very same time have a problem with their religion. It's very possible for the abolitionist to have a problem with the institution of slavery that has a person bound while simultaneously loving the slave that's trapped in it. This makes sense to the rational Western mind. This book has nothing to do with the racial makeup of any group of people. No one who knows me can accuse me of racism on any level. As a matter of fact, I don't even feel that Islamic studies is a race relations issue, no matter what the media is trying to make it into. To be honest, calling me a racist for writing this book would be a very stupid thing to do. That charge has several problems. Number one, if my book attacks Islam, and you call that actually an attack against a certain race, then what you're doing is making no distinction between a certain race of people and Islam. Am I right? Does that make sense? Essentially, it's like saying that Islam and the race are one and the same, so if you attack the one, you attack the other. To that, I can only reply that a failure to make a distinction between a race or a group of people and a religion on the part of the critic does not automatically mean racism on my part. It simply means that the critic has not been trained in Western thought or philosophy or logic, and they cannot separate the two in their own mind. This is their own problem to work out, and this does not make me a racist in the least. Number two, failing to make a distinction between Islam and any race of people is in and of itself a racist concept. It fails to recognize the diversity and the ethnic diversity of the people that make up the religion of Islam worldwide, on every continent. Red, white, yellow, black, etc. Islam is composed of many people groups. To say that attacking Islam is actually attacking a race of people is to identify Islam with a specific race of people. So calling me a racist is a racist statement because in order to do so, you have to apply a racial stereotype to Islam and then identify Islam with that race of people and with that race alone. I do not recommend wasting your time trying to make such empty and bankrupt charges stick against me or my book. Don't try to call me a bigot for daring to raise questions about Islam. That is not the case. That is not what's going on here. Let us stick to the facts only, please. As a simple point of logic, it is very possible for me to have a problem with a certain religious worldview, but at the same time love absolutely the people involved and even trapped in the religion. As a matter of fact, this idea is so easy to understand that only people who either cannot or will not separate a person from his religion will have a problem with it. Only people who have been warped with postmodernism. Let me assure you that my target is not any specific group of people, but rather I'm aimed at the spiritual forces that are guiding people. These acts of terror were nothing more than the Qur'an being carried out to a T. These are the teachings of Allah, which were supposedly revealed through Muhammad and ultimately recorded in the Qur'an. They are there to be examined, and we're going to examine them in the rest of this book. The majority are following an uneducated minority who have powerful positions and TV cameras. Today, people are trying to defend Islam by saying stuff like, this was done only by fanatics who aren't true Muslims, people who have misinterpreted the Islamic sacred texts. Of course, the people saying this are either really young and have been brainwashed since day one by the modern diversity movement, or they're really liberal adults, or they're paid news anchor men and women who've been hired to advance a certain social agenda by their sponsors, or even worse, they're on the payroll of either a Muslim country or a terrorist group. No matter what category various people fall under, whenever actually challenged with the real question of how much Islamic history have you actually studied, they usually shrug their shoulders. When asked, well, how many different translations of the Qur'an do you own at your house? They say none. How many have you read? None. Their mouths are shut when you hit them with that nail in the coffin question of how much of the Qur'an or the Islamic primary source reference works have you actually studied or read yourself. Their mouths are shut. They haven't done any work in the field whatsoever. The people who are taking a microphone and getting in front of a camera and putting the innocent mask on the religion of Islam are not even academically qualified to speak intelligently about the issue. All they can do is puke up the old, tired, borrowed, and unimpressive cliches that were fed to them at their most recent tolerance seminar on their college campus or in their workplace. They can only regurgitate the catchphrases that they heard their professors spew out in their comparative religion course at their liberal university, or their favorite social commentator on their mainstream cable television station. But when it comes to raw facts, when it comes to brute facts, when it comes to tangible data, they can offer none in order to support their "we are the world" soft concept of Islam. This should tell you something about the view that they're trying to sell you. If a view cannot or will not be backed up by evidence and facts, but only with emotionalism and slogans and bullying and intimidation, then that view is way more than likely not true. The masses reject the truth. A lie becomes the majority national view. In contrast, I have studied this issue at length and in depth. As far back as 1998, I am on record, both in writing and recording, warning people that Islam was building for this day right under our noses, right here on our streets in America. It was in many ways an inside job. I knew with absolute certainty that at some point an attack from within our own country would be coming someday, and I even knew that it'd be this big, and I knew it would be on this level. I just couldn't fill in the exact blanks as to when, where, or how it would come, or what it was going to look like. But people were too busy calling me mean. Some people thought I was negative and not loving. I got called intolerant, and even, the granddaddy of them all, ignorant. Someone who's never read a Qur'an was telling me that I was ignorant. That was a laugh. This was difficult and it hurt my feelings a lot, but the silliest and the most intellectually bankrupt name that was ever meant to intimidate me into silence was by calling me judgmental. Folks, it's silly to ever call anyone judgmental. You cannot call a person judgmental without first forming a judgment about them. When they said, "You're so judgmental," I'd respond, "Is that the judgment that you've made about me?" Calling someone judgmental is in and of itself a judgment about them. So this kind of behavior is actually not bright. It doesn't add to a discussion. Brother or sister reading this, or in this case listening to this, never allow someone to call you judgmental right then and there in front of their face, and anyone who's listening to your discussion, you need to expose their statement for the philosophical absurdity and the logical flaw that it is. Anyway, people don't call me these names anymore too often. The name calling and the backstabbing, even by other Christians at times, which is an extremely painful thing to live through. It has not disappeared completely, unfortunately, but I have to admit that for the most part, people see that there's actually something to what I was talking about for the years leading up to this attack. I'm no longer crazy. To be honest, I have to admit I hated to be right on this day. I'm going to say it again, I hated to be right on this day. I'm not happy that I was right. But I've had people who once thought I was nuts on September 10th, 2001, after the attack, apologize to me, even become friends of mine, and ultimately volunteer to work alongside me and to help educate the public and get the truth out there. So I know, because I've seen the mighty fall, that people's minds and hearts can be changed once they simply have access to the facts. And I'm excited to get those facts into your hands in a written form. Woohoo! This is the day I've always dreamed about. However, the biggest tragedy of all is that the majority of people out there in American culture don't even want to hear or wrestle with or work through or struggle with these concepts. They don't care about truth. They care about whether or not their quarterback is going to report to training camp. or the newest reality TV show. But if you care about truth, you keep right on reading because you're about to get it. Chapter 3, Islam's close relationship to terrorism. The formal charge. I am the prosecutor. You, the reader, or in this context, you, the listener, are the jury. And Islam stands before you on trial as a defendant for its involvement in the attack against our great nation on Tuesday, September the 11th, 2001, the day that I'm now calling the Manhattan Massacre. Other people will copy it, but it was done here first. Islam also stands on trial for being a religion of violence. I understand that this is a serious charge to make, and according to logic, when I make such a charge, I incur the burden of proof. Can I define, document, and defend my charges beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty? Absolutely. I'm getting set to break it down for you very plainly so that without regard to your education level, your walk of life, etc., you're going to plainly and clearly see the case for yourself. Listen and live. The Qur'an as the source of the evidence. I have no problem in proving my case against Islam. My side is easily demonstrated, and my view is rock solid from an evidentiary standpoint, though I fully admit that it's not very popular emotionally or culturally or socially right now. Hopefully that's going to change over time as people get access to more information and as they begin to actually care about and seek out truth. I know that within Islam, though the vast majority holds to the Hadith in general, Sahih al-Bukhari in particular, as an authoritative second inspiration of Allah, there are mixed views within the Islamic world as to the reliability of some of these texts. So in order to avoid confusion and controversy, this book is going to stick strictly with the document that no Muslim will argue against, the Qur'an. For a deeper analysis of jihad as it appears in the Hadith, simply log on to the internet and visit www.faithdefenders.com or call 1-800-41-TRUTH, that is 1-800-41 and the word truth, and order the booklet, The Doctrine of Jihad According to the Quran and the Hadith by Dr. Robert A. Morey. Something to look for going forward, my use of commentary by Abdullah Yusuf Ali. Here on the North American continent, the most popular commentator amongst all of the Islamic commentators is named Abdullah Yusuf Ali. Perhaps Ahmed Deedat is a close second place, but Ali has done us the favor of making his own translation of the Quran from the original Arabic into English, and he's even went so far as to line it extensively with scholastic footnotes that show us the Islamic position on various passages. Since he is the most popular, and he's the one that the Muslim down the street is probably reading in order to be educated as to how to interpret the Quran, I'm going to be quoting his commentary extensively so that you might begin to gain an understanding into the Muslim view of certain verses and teachings. Defining the word jihad. I can cite for you a ton of verses that show the doctrine of jihad is in the Quran, but this means absolutely nothing unless I first formally define it for you. Why is this necessary? I first formally define it because modern Muslims, in order to make this ancient, pagan, barbaric, violent, tribal religion seem legitimate in today's civilized Western world, what they do is they attempt to dress it in nice clothes. It's actually an evangelism tactic that's pretty popular. You see it all the time in false religions. What they actually attempt to do is hide the truth about what Islam actually teaches behind closed doors. In order to pull this off, they even go so far as to redefine certain Muslim words when they're using them to you. Like I said earlier, this tactic is not unique to Islam at all. This type of deception is common in all false religious systems. Don't take my word for it. Do your own research. Do your own thinking. If you feel led of God to examine what's commonly called comparative religion, what you're going to begin to see is a pattern unfolding. And as you move from one false religion, non-Christian religion or non-Christian system of thought to the next, what you're going to discover is that each of them believes something that is absolutely absurd, absolutely culturally unacceptable, absolutely ridiculous. And their core doctrinal statements and their quote-unquote scriptures always come out and define and systematize it. But in their public presentation of their religion to the press or to potential converts, they take these crazy out-of-step doctrines and either avoid them altogether and pretend they don't exist, or else present them in a different way, dressed up to be presentable and acceptable in a Western civilized society. Mormonism, for example, will call Jesus their Savior. They'll even make the claim that they're a Christian denomination. But we have to be very careful because they have a different definition for the words Jesus and the word Savior than the Orthodox evangelical Protestant Christian. One can have a conversation with a member of a false or non-Christian religion, and when they hear that person using the same terminology as their own, they'd think that they were both talking about the same thing as each other. They'd believe that there's not really that great of a difference at all between their religions, unless they defined their terms first. Once they heard each other's definitions of the words, they'd see it in a whole different light. They'd realize that their beliefs were actually worlds apart. Even a member of the Jehovah's Witnesses will say, "We're Christians." The truth is that they're not, but they're masquerading to be used of Satan to fool who they may. Their tactic is one of counterfeit. Satan's tactic was one of counterfeit, thus it's reproduced in them. Counterfeit and disguise are the main methods of all false belief systems. Anytime you have to lie about something in order to present a religion, that religion has something to hide. And how contradictory is it anyway to spread something claiming to be a message of truth by the method by way of speaking lies? The modern Muslim movement here in the Americas is using this method and lying to people by toning down its image and holding back on telling the truth about what it actually teaches. Westernized Muslim teachers sometimes try to redefine the word jihad as a spiritual battle and not necessarily a literal one, sort of an inward struggle of some kind. Or some admit, okay, I admit it's a physical battle, but they dress it up by saying that it's actually a defense. It's a physical response to a physical attack that someone else made against the Muslim first. So it's violence, but it's self-defense, you see. It moves me to laughter to hear some college kids say, Islam is a religion of peace. I know because I took this Introduction to Islam course at the college, and when I asked the Muslim professor if Islam was a religion of violence, he said no. Hello, dummy. How do you think he's going to answer that question? Is the teacher voluntarily going to say, okay, I admit it. Terrorism is both taught and practiced in Islam. The Qur'an commands it in order to further the message of Muhammad across the planet. I got to admit that such an honest answer would be refreshing. It'd be a nice change of pace, but it would both get the professor fired as well as generate a lot of bad public relations between the Islamic community and the rest of the country. So for now, they're simply going to have to keep it quiet and keep up the act to all those who are willing to believe it. But if I'm right, then the real question becomes, why would American Muslims distort the facts like that? What are they doing? They're counting on the fact that you, probably having been born and raised right here in America, a Westerner, have no idea about the truth concerning what Islam has always historically believed and taught. Odds are very good that you've never even seen a Quran in person, much less actually opened it up and read it. So they're actually in a great position. They can pretty much just present to you what Islam is, and you, having no frame of reference against which to check their accuracy, have no choice but to swallow and to accept whatever they're saying as though it's fact. The average American citizen has never taken the time from their busy life to sit down and read the Islamic books and things of that nature. So Muslims often get away with passing Islam off as some religion of peace right here in America, and we, for the most part, being ignorant of the issue, eat it up. So I've felt the need to put this book into this form, and from the beginning of the book, get a formal definition of the literal word jihad from a qualified source, apart from the deception that's currently out there in the mainstream media and in the universities and the public school system. Let's look at the actual scholars in the field. Check this out. Quote, jihad, the duty to fight all unbelievers, close quote. That is page 201 of Islam by Alfred Guillaume. So this book is from the Glossary of Muslim Terms in the back of Guillaume's book, Islam. Notice that the definition of the word jihad, it is the duty to fight all unbelievers. Another way it could have been worded is the duty to fight all non-Muslims. If you're a Muslim reader, you naturally have two questions. Who is Alfred Guillaume, and what qualifies him to write about the topic of Islam? And if you're a member of the NOI, the Nation of Islam, or as I sometimes jokingly refer to it, the Nation of Ignorance. Your real problem with Guillaume, before even opening the book, is his name. You probably don't think it's a Muslim name because it's not Arabic, even though Shabazz itself is actually a Pakistani name in terms of origin. Oh well, doesn't stop you from having your educational deficiency and making it a problem that gets in the way of you learning. No matter which branch of Islam you come from, these are somewhat legitimate questions. Does Alfred Guillaume actually qualify to write about Islam? We're getting set to check out an excerpt from his book, and you can decide for yourself. On the inside covers a very brief bio on his life. It says this, quote, Alfred Guillaume was the head of the Department of Near and Middle East in the School of Oriental and African Studies, and professor of Arabic in the University of London, and later visiting professor of Arabic in the University of Princeton, New Jersey. He took up Arabic after studying theology and Oriental languages at the University of Oxford. In the First World War, he served in France, and then in the Arab Bureau in Cairo. He was ordained when he returned to England. He was known in the Islamic world as the editor of the Legacy of Islam, which has been translated into several languages, and as the editor and translator of one of the most important Arabic works on philosophical theology. During the Second World War, the British Council invited him to accept a visiting professorship at the American University of Beirut, where he greatly enlarged his circle of Muslim friends. The Arab Academy of Damascus and the Royal Academy of Baghdad honored him by electing him to their number, and the University of Istanbul chose him as their first foreign lecturer on Christian and Islamic theology. He died in 1965, close quote. Again, that is the inside cover of Islam by Alfred Guillaume.